Startup Nation by Dan Senor and Saul Singer. Picture this. You're in a luxurious hotel suite high in the Swiss Alps. The air is crisp and thin, and the tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Two men sit in near silence. One is Shimon Peres, the world-famous statesman and Nobel Prize winner in his 80s. The other is Shai Agassi, a brilliant young tech executive who's usually the most confident guy in any room, but right now, he's sweating bullets. They're on what feels like an impossible mission, convincing the world's biggest car companies to ditch gasoline and go electric. They just got rejected by a major automaker CEO who basically laughed them out of the room, calling their idea a pipe dream. Now they're waiting for their last shot, a meeting with Carlos Ghosn, the legendary boss of Renault and Nissan. This single high-stakes moment is your gateway into one of the wildest economic success stories of our time. We're talking about Israel, a country smaller than New Jersey, with fewer people than New York City, sitting on basically zero natural resources, that somehow became a global innovation powerhouse rivaling Silicon Valley itself. The book we're diving into today is Startup Nation, the story of Israel's economic miracle, by Dan Senor and Saul Singer. This isn't your typical business book full of boring charts and corporate jargon. It's a fascinating look into the soul of a culture that thrives on adversity, questions absolutely everything, and has basically turned doing the impossible into a national sport. Here's what we're going to uncover together. Yes, the statistics are mind-blowing. More companies on the NASDAQ than all of Europe combined. More venture capital per person than anywhere else on Earth. But we're going deeper than numbers. We're going to explore the cultural DNA, the unique military experience, and the historical pressures that created an entire nation of entrepreneurs. Here's my promise. By the end of our time together, you won't just understand how Israel pulled this off. You'll walk away with timeless principles of innovation, resilience, and creative thinking that you can actually use in your own life, no matter where you are or what you're trying to build. So let's head back to that tense hotel room in the Alps and see how one audacious idea can change everything. When Carlos Ghosn walked into that room, Shimon Peres didn't play it safe. After their last brutal rejection, you'd think he'd be cautious, right? Instead, he leaned forward with quiet intensity and told Ghosn something radical. Oil was finished. Not just because we're running out, but because the world doesn't want it anymore. It's funding terrorism and global instability. Peres argued, we don't need to defend against incoming rockets if we can cut off the funding that launches them in the first place. Then, something incredible happened. Ghosn interrupted him and said, Mr. Peres, I read Shai's paper, and he is absolutely right. The future is electric. We have the car, and we think we have the battery. The relief in that room must have been overwhelming. This was the moment Shai Agassi's radical vision found its champion. Here's what made Agassi's idea so brilliant. Electric cars seemed ridiculously expensive because of the battery. But what if you didn't buy the battery with the car? What if you treated batteries like gasoline, something you pay for as you go? Even better, what if you created a network of stations where you could swap a dead battery for a fresh one in less time than filling a gas tank? Suddenly, electric cars weren't just possible, they were cheaper and more convenient. Agassi's company, called Better Place, would work like a cell phone provider. You'd sign up for a mileage plan and get a subsidized car. Better Place would own the batteries and swap stations. And why launch in Israel? Because its small size and isolation, surrounded by hostile neighbors, made it a perfect, self-contained, quote, transportation island. What looked like a strategic weakness suddenly became the perfect testing ground for a world-changing idea. This story isn't just about one brilliant guy with a clever idea. It's a window into the Israeli mindset. The authors call it chutzpah. You've probably heard this word before, usually meaning arrogance or nerve. But in Israel, it's something completely different. It's the courage to challenge authority, to question the status quo, to genuinely believe that you, yes you personally, can find a better way. It's basically the default setting. We see this chutzpah playing out everywhere. Take the story of a tiny Israeli startup called Fraud Sciences. In the early 2000s, the president of PayPal, Scott Thompson, reluctantly agreed to a 20-minute meeting with its founder, Shvat Sheikht. PayPal, this giant of online payments, had 2,000 people dedicated to fighting fraud. Sheikht, this quiet young guy, walked in and said his idea was simple. The world divides into good people and bad people, and his company could tell the difference online. Thompson was almost insulted. It sounded ridiculously naive. "How exactly do you do that?" he asked, ready to end the meeting. Sheikt's answer? Hunting down terrorists. He explained that in his elite army intelligence unit, his job was tracking terrorists through their online financial footprints. Good people leave traces online. Bad people try to hide. To test him, Thompson gave Sheikht 100,000 of PayPal's past transactions, with all the personal data scrubbed to make it harder. He figured he wouldn't hear back for months. 3 days later, he got an email from Israel. "We're done." Thompson and his team of PhDs were stunned. Sheikh's little company, working with incomplete data, had been 17% more accurate than PayPal at identifying good customers that PayPal had mistakenly rejected. Thompson realized this wasn't just a cool new tool. This was a revolution. PayPal couldn't just partner with them, they had to buy them immediately. They ended up paying $169 million for this 55-person company. What Scott Thompson experienced wasn't just a clever algorithm. It was a mindset forged in an environment where your ideas could literally mean life or death. As one investor in Fraud Sciences put it, when you've been developing technology to find terrorists, finding thieves is pretty simple. This constant, almost relentless questioning of authority shows up everywhere. It happened at Intel, too. In the early 2000s, the entire computer industry obsessed over one thing: clock speed. Faster was always better, right? But as chips got faster, they got hotter, creating what engineers called the power wall. For laptops, this was a dead end. You couldn't fit a big enough fan inside to cool them down. A team of engineers at Intel's office in Haifa, Israel, saw this disaster coming. They developed a radical new chip design. Instead of just revving the engine faster, they designed it to work smarter, like a car with multiple gears. The chip could run more slowly, stay cooler, but actually process software faster. They brought their breakthrough to Intel headquarters in California, expecting a hero's welcome. Instead, they hit a wall of resistance. The entire industry, including Wall Street, measured a chip's value by its clock speed. A slower-running chip, even if it was more powerful, was a marketing nightmare. The head of the chip division tried to kill the project. But the Israeli team wouldn't back down. They were absolutely relentless. They flew back and forth to California so often, they seemed to be everywhere at once, cornering executives in hallways to make their case. They knew the company was heading for disaster, and they refused to let it crash. Eventually, armed with overwhelming data and sheer persistence, they won. In 2003, Intel released the new chip, codenamed Banias after a spring in northern Israel. It launched as the Centrino chip for laptops. It was a massive hit and became the foundation of Intel's growth for years. An analyst later said the Israeli team saved the company. So here's the obvious question. Where does this culture of audacity, this chutzpah, this relentless drive to challenge and innovate actually come from? The authors point to one institution above all, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF. For most people, military brings to mind rigid hierarchies, strict obedience, following orders without question. But the IDF is completely different. Because nearly everyone in Israel serves, its culture permeates the entire society. And that culture is surprisingly anti-hierarchical. Consider a moment from the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Israeli tank commanders suddenly faced a terrifying new weapon, the Sagar missile. A single soldier hiding in the desert could fire this wire-guided missile and destroy Israeli tanks from a distance. The soldiers had no training for this, no doctrine. They had to figure it out in the heat of battle while their friends were dying around them. And they did. The tank crews realized the missile was guided by a soldier, watching a small red light on its tail. So right there on the battlefield, they invented a new tactic. When someone spotted a red light, every tank would start moving randomly and firing back toward the shooter. The dust they kicked up would obscure the shooter's view, and the return fire would break his concentration. It worked. This tactic, invented by soldiers at the front lines, was later adopted by NATO. This is bottom-up innovation at its most critical. The soldiers didn't wait for orders from a general. They saw a problem and solved it. This happens by design. The IDF is deliberately understaffed at senior levels. There are fewer generals and colonels giving commands, which forces more responsibility down to junior ranks. A 23-year-old company commander in the IDF might be responsible for the lives of 100 soldiers, millions of dollars in equipment, and making life-or-death decisions in complex urban environments, while journalists film from nearby roofs. As one commander put it, "Tell me how many 23-year-olds elsewhere in the world live with that kind of pressure." This experience transforms them. By the time they finish their service and head to university, they're not kids anymore. They're mature leaders and battle-tested problem solvers. This creates a national talent pool uniquely prepared for the chaos and uncertainty of entrepreneurship. The phrase, "it's not my fault," simply doesn't exist in this culture. The military also acts as the nation's great equalizer and ultimate networking hub. A taxi driver might command a millionaire CEO in their reserve unit. People from every background, new immigrants from Ethiopia and Russia, kids from wealthy suburbs and poor towns, are thrown together and forced to rely on each other. The bonds they form last a lifetime, creating a powerful social network where everyone is connected. As one Israeli entrepreneur says, the whole country is 1 degree of separation. This brings us to another key ingredient of the startup nation, immigration. Israel is fundamentally a nation of immigrants. 9 out of 10 Jewish Israelis are either immigrants themselves or children or grandchildren of immigrants. As one observer noted, immigrants are, by definition, risk-takers. They're not afraid to start over. A nation of immigrants becomes a nation of entrepreneurs. The most dramatic example was the wave of immigration from the former Soviet Union in the 1990s. In just a few years, nearly 1 million people arrived, increasing Israel's population by 20%. This would be like the United States absorbing 60 million people in a decade. And these weren't just any immigrants. A huge number were highly educated scientists, engineers, and doctors. Back in the Soviet Union, anti-Semitism meant that being the absolute best in your field was a survival strategy. This wave of human capital arrived just as the global tech boom was taking off, and Israel's new venture capital industry was being born. It was an incredible collision of talent, timing, and opportunity. These new arrivals provided the engineering firepower that fueled the high-tech explosion. This constant influx of new people, fresh ideas, and powerful drive is woven into the country's DNA. But there's another, less obvious element to Israel's success: the ability to turn disadvantages into advantages. For its entire existence, Israel has been small, isolated, and under threat. But, as we saw with Shai Agassi, this isolation can create the perfect laboratory. The same goes for its lack of natural resources. Israel is mostly desert, so what did they do? They became world leaders in water technology. The story of Netafim is perfect. Its founder, Simcha Blas, got the idea for drip irrigation from watching a single tree thriving with seemingly no water. He discovered it was being fed by a tiny, slow leak in an underground pipe. This led to inventing a system that lets farmers increase crop yields by up to 50% while using 40% less water. An invention born of scarcity in the desert is now used worldwide. This same pattern repeated in geopolitics. For decades, the Arab League enforced a strict economic boycott against Israel. Major companies, especially car manufacturers like Toyota and Honda, refused to do business there. This forced Israeli entrepreneurs to leapfrog their own region. They couldn't sell to their neighbors, so they had to think globally from day one. They focused on products that weren't subject to boycotts or high shipping costs. Small components, software, and ideas. This positioned them perfectly for the knowledge-based economy of the future. Perhaps the most dramatic example of turning adversity into strength came in 1967. On the eve of the Six-Day War, Israel's closest ally and main arms supplier, France, suddenly imposed an arms embargo. President Charles de Gaulle, in a stunning betrayal, cut Israel off. This was Israel's Sputnik moment. The country's leaders realized they could never again depend so heavily on another nation for survival. They made a bold decision. Israel had to build its own advanced weapons systems, its own fighter jets, its own tanks. It was incredibly ambitious, almost impossible for such a small country. The most ambitious project was the Lavi fighter jet. Though eventually canceled after billions were spent, the effort had profound, unintended consequences. It created a massive pool of world-class engineers with experience in the most advanced aerospace and electronic systems. When the program shut down, thousands of highly skilled engineers flooded into the private sector, unleashing a wave of technological talent that helped kickstart the high-tech boom. This is where another unique Israeli trait comes in, the mashup. Because of diverse experiences people get, moving from military to university to business, often in different fields, there's a natural tendency to combine disciplines in unexpected ways. A perfect example is Gavriel Idon. He was a rocket scientist who designed electro-optical systems that allow missiles to see their targets. One day, he had an idea. What if he could miniaturize that missile technology and put it inside a pill? A pill with a camera that patients could swallow, transmitting images from inside the digestive tract. Everyone told him it was impossible. But he persisted, and his company, Given Imaging, created the PillCam. Today, it's a revolutionary medical device used around the world. This is the Israeli mashup, combining missile guidance technology with gastroenterology. It's the kind of cross-disciplinary leap that happens when your fighter pilots are also art students, and your rocket scientists think about medicine. Of course, all the culture, talent, and audacity in the world won't create a startup boom without one crucial ingredient: money. In the early 1990s, Israel had virtually no venture capital industry. Foreign investors saw Israel as a place for conflict and archaeology, not high-return investments. This is where the government stepped in with one of the most brilliant and effective industrial policies in history. The program was called Yozma, which means initiative in Hebrew. The idea was beautifully simple. The government offered to co-invest with foreign venture capital firms. They essentially said, if you create a venture fund to invest in Israeli startups, we'll give you a significant chunk of the money, sharing the risk with you. But here's the best part. If your fund succeeds, you can buy us out for a cheap price. We take the risk, you get the reward. It was an offer no investor could refuse. Suddenly, the world's top venture capitalists from the US and Europe flocked to Israel. But they didn't just bring money, they brought expertise. They taught a generation of young Israelis how to build companies, how to market products, how to think like global business leaders. Yozma created 10 new venture funds, and in just a few years, spawned a thriving, private, self-sustaining venture capital industry. As one entrepreneur said, venture capital was the match that sparked the fire. The combination of all these elements, a culture of chutzpah, a military that acts as an incubator for leaders, a constant influx of ambitious immigrants, a knack for turning disadvantages into advantages, and smart government catalysts, created the perfect storm for innovation. The book ends by contrasting Israel with a place like Dubai. Dubai tried to engineer a technology cluster from the top down. It built gleaming office parks, offered tax-free zones, and invited the world's biggest tech companies to set up sales offices. And it created a successful commercial hub. But it didn't create a culture of innovation. Why? Because people who come to Dubai are mostly there to make money and then leave. There's no social glue, no shared sense of purpose or community. It lacks what the authors, quoting historian Barbara Tuchman, call a, quote, motive. Israel, for all its problems, has always had a motive: the drive to build and secure a home for a people. This sense of purpose, this idea that you're not just building a company but also building a country, provides powerful, intangible fuel. Today's Israeli entrepreneurs, the authors say, see themselves as farmers of high tech. They're carrying on the pioneering spirit of the country's founders, but their fields are made of silicon, and their crops are ideas. They still have that sense of being part of something larger than themselves. It's a powerful combination: restless dissatisfaction that's always looking for a better way, fused with deep-seated commitment to teamwork and shared mission. It's the engine that powers the Startup Nation. As we wrap up Startup Nation, it's easy to be struck by the sheer number of incredible stories and mind-blowing statistics. But I think the real power of this book, especially for anyone starting out, isn't in the what, but in the why. It's a book about a national mindset, and mindsets are things we can all learn from. The first, and perhaps most important lesson, is about our relationship with adversity. The story of Israel is a masterclass in turning obstacles into opportunities. A desert with no water? Let's invent technology that changes agriculture for the entire planet. Surrounded by enemies and cut off from regional markets? Let's become world leaders in industries that don't need shipping lanes, like software and cybersecurity. Betrayed by our closest ally? Let's build our own defense industry, which will accidentally seed our entire high-tech economy. There's a profound lesson here. We're so often taught to see constraints as limitations, as things that stop us. This book flips that idea completely. It suggests that constraints are often the very things that force us to be creative. Scarcity breeds ingenuity. Pressure forges diamonds. When you don't have all the resources in the world, you have to be smarter, faster, and more innovative. So next time you face a limitation, whether it's lack of money, time, or support, ask yourself the Israeli question: how can this disadvantage become my greatest advantage? The second powerful idea is the concept of chutzpah as a creative force. In many cultures, we're taught to respect hierarchy, wait our turn, not challenge our elders or bosses. This book argues that innovation doesn't work that way. Breakthroughs happen when someone has the courage to say, "I think there's a better way," even if they're the most junior person in the room. This isn't about being rude or disrespectful. It's about a culture where ideas are judged on their merit, not on the rank of the person who proposes them. It's about creating an environment where healthy debate and constructive disagreement are essential for progress. As you start your journey in school or your career, this is a powerful tool. Learn to question things respectfully. Learn to argue your case with passion and data. Don't be afraid to have an opinion, and don't be afraid to be wrong. The most valuable people in any organization aren't the ones who just follow orders, but the ones who think for themselves. Finally, the book highlights the incredible power of mission-driven work. From early pioneers draining swamps to modern entrepreneurs building global companies, there's a sense that their work is about more than just personal gain. It's about contributing to something larger than themselves. This motive, as the book calls it, is a source of incredible resilience and drive. When you have a purpose bigger than your own comfort or success, you find strength to persevere through inevitable setbacks. The work becomes more meaningful, and that meaning becomes powerful fuel. So as you think about what you want to do with your life, don't just ask, "What do I want to be?" Ask, "What problem do I want to solve? What mission do I want to be part of?" To put these ideas into practice today, try this. First, identify one constraint in your life right now. Instead of seeing it as negative, spend 10 minutes brainstorming 3 ways it could actually be a hidden advantage. Second, next time you're in a class or group and you disagree with something, find a respectful but confident way to voice your perspective. Practice having a better argument, not just winning one. It's a powerful combination of ideas that doesn't just explain the success of one small country. It provides a blueprint for a more resilient, creative, and purposeful way of thinking for all of us. That was a look into Startup Nation by Dan Senor and Saul Singer. We've journeyed through its core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you, A summary can only be a map. The real treasure is found when you explore the territory yourself. The true magic of a book like this happens in quiet moments of reading, when a particular story or simple phrase connects with you in unexpected ways. This summary is a signpost, meant to help you decide if this is a path worth walking. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or resonated with your ambition, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that can genuinely shift how you see challenges and opportunities in your own life. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.